Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. The case that I'm going to be looking into today is that of the serial killer Herbert Baumeister. This was a suggested case by Tom, so thank you for that. I appreciate any suggestions you guys have. I'd just like to let you know I mean no disrespect to anyone I'm going to talk about. I've just gathered this information off the internet and compiled it into a video for educational purposes. Please let me just say, if I've pronounced his surname incorrectly, I really do apologise. I've looked into videos of how it's said and I think I've got it right, but possibly I haven't, so please just bear with me on that. Herbert Richard Baumeister was born on the 7th of July in 1947. In Indianapolis, Indiana, to parents Dr. Herbert, who was actually an anesthesiologist, and his mother Elizabeth. Herbert was the eldest of their 4 children. I am going to refer to Herbert as Herb because that's how he was very well known to everyone around him, and so that's why I'm going to use it for the purposes of this video. But by all accounts, he had a really normal childhood, so there was no signs of abuse or anything like that. But when he hit kind of puberty, he began showing signs to the people around him of antisocial behaviour. So it was reported that he used to play with dead animals, and he was actually even caught urinating on a teacher's desk. There was also an incident where he found a dead crow and also put that on a teacher's desk. And so the people around him began to get obviously a little bit worried. The teachers contacted his parents and they started noticing things too. So they sent him off to be evaluated, and when he reached his teenage years, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia and multiple personality disorder, which you will find out is very true going through this case. The strange thing was that he actually never received any further treatment with regards to this. So yes, he was diagnosed with it, but then it was never acted on, and I don't understand why. Maybe he just flew under the radar and, I don't know, got forgotten about in a sense. I just don't know the reasoning behind it, but he was never actually treated for these diagnoses. In 1965, Herbert attended Indiana University High School. He would drop in and out of school, but the one thing that he was never really afraid of was going to work. He wasn't kind of one to shunt his work, and he would actually drift through a series of different jobs. Herb was described as having this very, very strong work ethic, but his behaviour also got very, very bizarre, and I don't know whether that's the reason he drifted through a lot of jobs, because they fired him or he quit, I don't know, but some of his behaviour was very strange. On one occasion, whilst working at the State Bureau for Motor Vehicles, he was caught urinating on a letter addressed to the governor. Now, it had already been floating around the work that somebody had recently urinated on a supervisor's desk. So obviously when they found him urinating on the letter, they realised that it was most likely him, and he was fired for it. Rightly so. He then got a job in a thrift store and he thoroughly enjoyed working in that. Herb went on to meet a woman called Juliana Slater whilst he was in college. The pair hit it off straight away. They really enjoyed each other's company, and it was said that he was a lot of fun to be around. In November 1971, the pair got married just after graduation. Herb did have these kind of visions of following his dad's footsteps and becoming a doctor, but he never actually finished college, and so that dream would just remain so a dream. His family life was going brilliantly though. Herb and Julie went on to have 3 children, and they adored their little family that they created. Juliana admitted that even though they'd been married for 25 years, that is a very long time, they'd only actually been intimate 6 times. 6 times in 25 years. Wow. The reasoning behind that will become more clear later on as we get through the case. In the 1970s, Herb was actually committed into a psychiatric hospital because his wife had rang his parents saying that he was hurting and that he needed help. He was there for 2 months, and when he came back out, his loving wife that absolutely adored him was there waiting for him, and they just carried on their life. Herb went on to ask his parents if he could loan $4,000 to open up his own business, and they loaned it to him, which was probably a good idea because maybe working for himself would have been better than working for other people, because he was urinating on people's desks. So I guess the only desk he'd have to urinate on was his own. Anyway, regardless, his parents did lend him the money, and they went on to open a successful thrift store. This was in 1988. He went on to open 2 stores eventually under the name Save-A-Lot. And this was a very, very successful business for the family. It was a really great venture. It really, really paid off, and it really did well for them. Fast forwarding to 1991, the Baumeister family purchased their family home, their dream family home. It was this large horse ranch called Fox Hollow Farm. They lived near this creek, and they had all of this land, and the land actually spanned 18 acres. They had kind of this forest area, and it was just beautiful. It was just absolutely stunning. It was in kind of the upscaled Westfield area, just outside of Indianapolis in Hamilton County. It had a stable, it had an indoor pool. As I said, their business was doing very well. The kids were in private school, and they were just seemingly living the American dream. As I said, they did own a chain of 2 stores. And it was not long after they actually opened this second one that their business started going downhill. And this, of course, caused tensions. They were used to getting a decent amount of money and things like that in, and suddenly that kind of stopped. So obviously it's going to cause some tension between them. After this, Juliana would often travel on vacation and spend a lot of the summer in Lake Wawasee in her mother-in-law's condo, whilst Herb would sort of stay at home and try and, I guess, rekindle the business, keep the business going, try and make it more successful. Tensions were rising, and they just needed a bit of space, which is completely understandable. Now, to the outside world, they had this perfect family life. They were wealthy. They lived in this big, beautiful house in a beautiful area. Herb was a well-respected businessman, and he would often give money away to charities, obviously in the early days when his business was doing very well. This well-respected family man led a secret double life, however. Whilst his wife was away, he was out trawling the gay bars, picking up men, and taking them back to his house. His home started to become very unkempt. Apart from one area, which was the pool area, he kind of kept this immaculate. He let everything else go, and his wife wasn't there, I guess, to make him clean up or give him the incentive to clean up, so he didn't. And the pool area was the only place that he did actually make an effort for. He always kept the bar really well stocked, probably for the people that he was bringing back home, the men. And he would do something pretty strange. He'd place these mannequins all around the pool, making it look like there was this never-ending pool party and everyone was there having fun and enjoying it. And I just found that very weird, because they're mannequins and he just had them all over the place. It's just very strange to me. And I would assume it'd be very strange to the men that he was bringing back too, because if I walked into a house where it was full of mannequins all around the pool, I'd be straight out there, I'm not going to lie. Anyway, in 1994, Herb and Julie's 13-year-old son was out in the back garden playing with his friend, minding his own business on his own land, when he discovered a partially buried skull. He brought it into his mother, who was rightly worried. Herb wasn't actually home at the time, and when he got home, she questioned him about the skull. Did he know anything about it? The son had found this skull on the land, and she was worried about it. So he quickly brushed it off and just said it was part of his dad's stuff that had been in the garage. His dad was an anesthesiologist, which obviously deals with anesthetics and things like that. So he kind of just said that it was part of an anatomy set, of like a human anatomy set that his father had, and he found it in the garage and he just wanted to get rid of it, so he took it outside and he buried it, which is very strange anyway, because it looked like a human body, a human skeleton. Why would you go and bury that in your back garden? Juliana believed him because she said that he never really threw anything away. So it was very plausible that he did have this set from his father and he just wanted to get rid of it now, and so he buried it in the garden. She just believed him. A week later, Herb did actually get rid of these bones, and I guess she just forgot about them. She believed him and she had no reason not to. Meanwhile, the Indianapolis Police Department are investigating these disappearances of all of these gay men that were of similar age, similar weight, similar height. They'd all gone missing in kind of similar areas, and they all had ties to the gay community. So these men had gone missing and they didn't know who had taken them, why they'd been taken, if they'd been taken at all, because obviously they could have voluntarily disappeared of their own accord. The police just kept getting these reports of these missing men, and it was racking up. There were so many of them. The following are the names of the men that went missing, beginning with the year 1993. Johnny Bear on the 28th of May. He was 28 years old and he was last seen on his way to work. Jeff Jones was 30 and on the 28th of July, he was last seen coming from a Salvation Army rehab centre. Richard Hamilton, 20 years old. On the 31st of July, he was last seen at 2 a.m. leaving his apartment to go and get some cigarettes. Alan Livingston, 28, on the 7th of August was last seen getting into a white vehicle. Manuel Resendez, 31, on the exact same day was last seen at a nightclub with friends. When it was time to leave, he couldn't be found. So all of those men went missing in 1993. The following year, the disappearances simply carried on. Alan Broussard, 28, the 6th of June, now in 1994, was last seen leaving a gay bar. Roger Allen Goodler, 33, disappeared on the 22nd of July. And the disappearance of this man did kind of shift the case drastically because his mother had seen him earlier on that day and she kind of tried forcing the police into doing something about him going missing, to do anything, but they couldn't because of this 30-day rule. They couldn't look for him until after 30 days, I believe. So she went on to hire a private investigator. This private investigator went on to dig deep into the case. They put up missing people's flyers. They did interviews with anyone that may have last seen him. And they found out that he was last seen getting into a car. And that from then on, he wasn't ever seen again. There were so many similarities with these missing men. And the gay community began kind of posting these posters and everything all around the bars and things like that. And the sad thing that at the time was this case didn't really get much media attention because of how their sexuality was perceived at the time, which is very, very unfortunate because maybe if it did have more publicity in the media or things like that, maybe they could have saved some of these men's lives, but obviously that's just speculation. Just a couple of days after Roger's disappearance, another man went missing. Stephen Hales, 26, who was last seen outside of a library. And this library was a well-known area that the gay community frequented. Once again, another man with ties to this community had just vanished off the face of the earth. He was the 8th man in 2 years to have disappeared. Then in August of 1994, an anonymous man rang in who didn't actually want to be known. He didn't want his name out there. So for the purpose of this video, I'm going to call him John. So John was in this bar. He ended up chatting to this man who was reading the missing persons poster of Roger Goodler. Now, Roger Goodler was actually a really good friend of John's. So he approached this man and they began chatting. You really got the vibe that this man knew something about Roger and he wanted to know more about it. So this man introduced himself as Brian Smart. And the feeling that he got of him wanted him to find out more. And within the next 15 minutes, they both were in a car together, going back to a place where Brian said was his boss's house and he sort of was allowed access. The drive seemed quite long and then they arrived at this suburban home. Inside there were these mannequins all lined up in all these different poses and he found it a bit odd, so he asked about them and Brian said that the owner didn't want to be on his own and so he would put them up everywhere, which is weird. Anyway, they start getting closer as the night progresses. Now, Brian offers him a drink, but John said, no, I've had enough. He doesn't want anything else to drink. But Brian continued to drink, I believe. And as they sort of get closer, they begin to ask each other what they like. He tells John that he wants him to strangle him with a hose whilst he was pleasuring himself. So he asked John to wrap this hose around Brian's neck, his neck, and that he pulls it tight as requested. That was when Brian fell unconscious and fell into the pool, but he quickly came around, he woke up, and he told John of this heightened feeling that it gave him, and that was something that he wanted to share with John, and so John agreed. He thought he'd try it and he let him do it. It quickly became clear that Brian didn't really want to let go. He told him that he would get sexual gratification from seeing their eyes bulge out, the colour of the skin change, sometimes their lips would crack. And it was quite disturbing, obviously. So, obviously he'd done this a few times. And with force, for someone's eyes to be bulging out. Oh, it's horrible to even think about. John managed to get out of this grip. And Brian was very apologetic. He obviously said, it was an accident. I didn't mean to go that far. And he just got carried away. John found it very disturbing and really suspicious, actually. Because all these gay men were going missing. And clearly he had done this a few times, and so he just thought that possibly this was the man that the police were looking for. He told him that he would be going to the police, which was a very ballsy move in my eyes. He could have just killed him there and then if he wanted to, but his reaction was laughing in his face and basically saying no one will believe a guy like you, so go ahead. John went on and called the police anonymously, as I said, and he told them that this man was strangling people and that obviously he was suspicious of him being behind all of these men going missing. The police thought along the same lines. Obviously it could potentially be this person, and so they tried to find him. They tried to find the house, but they weren't successful. I believe they went out on 3 separate occasions to try and locate this house, but the description that was given and things, it was just really difficult and they didn't end up finding it. Not only that, the name that he'd given was fake. So they'd kind of gotten this vital lead that could have resulted in a break in the case, but they couldn't find the house and the name was fake, and so it didn't lead anywhere. And once more, it went cold. By all accounts, John did keep receiving these calls from Brian, and he would tell him about these accidents that happened and that some people had actually died. The thing was that he got a high from that. So I do actually believe that the first murder was an accident, that he had been strangling him like he had done so many times, and it had gone too far and he ended up killing this person. But he got a high from that. He got probably the best high he'd ever got from it. And that was probably where he began escalating. You can never get that high again, so he carried on killing, I guess, to chase it. On the 1st of April in 1995, Michael Keenan, who was 46, was reported as missing when he didn't turn up for work. The same year, in August, 35-year-old Jerry Williams' coma vanished. The police would later recover his car from a shopping mall, and he was the 10th man to go missing in just less than 3 years. The police had pretty much with certainty the idea that this was a serial killer and that obviously they were targeting these gay men. In August 1995, John was out at a bar when he spots Brian again. This was the man he had reported to the police pretty much nearly a year ago by now for strangling all these men, and there he was again right in front of him. So when Brian left the bar, John told his friend to follow him out and to take down his license plate, which he did, and he got his license plate. John took that into the police, and the police looked into who owned this car, and this car was registered to Herbert Baumeister. So this family man was not only taking these gay men back to his house, he was drugging them, strangling them with a hose, and then burying them in his garden. They checked into his background and they decided to confront this man. Now, he appeared as this very nervous man that would just fall apart really at any given moment. He denied everything, denied being bisexual or gay or anything like that. He had a wife, he had kids. But they told him that his car was actually spotted outside of a bar, and that was when he became very upset. Nobody knew about his secret sexuality and that he frequented these bars, and so he wanted to keep it a secret. When the police asked if they could search his house, of course, he refused. They went on to approach Juliana to try and get her permission to search the house, but they were literally coming to her with their suspicions of him being this serial killer, and they told him that they were investigating him to do with these homosexual homicides. And she just froze and she just didn't believe him. Herb was not that kind of man. He'd never raised his voice, not once. He'd never raised his hand. He loved his wife and his kids, and this wasn't the man she knew. This wasn't the man she fell in love with. She was just in so much shock and disbelief, and she just wouldn't let them on the property. She told them to get a warrant. She absolutely loved this man. She'd been with him for 25 years. She knew him inside out like the back of her hand, or so she thought she did. With not being able to get on the land, the police took a helicopter up. They were trying to do these heat signatures over the land to try and see if they got anything kind of from decomposing bodies, and unfortunately they did not. The perfect life of the Baumeisters quickly began falling apart. Their relationship was already strained because of the financial difficulties and things like that. Herb's mood swings just began to amplify, and he began behaving a lot more erratically than he ever had before. Obviously, as I told you, he used to urinate on people's desks and things like that, so he did have some erratic behaviour, and his wife probably thought he was a little bit strange, but not to the extent that he was now behaving in. And she was frightened, so she sort of began spending more and more time apart from him. The business had already begun to fail, as I said, and the financial difficulties, just everything that they built up was just crumbling around them. In June of 1996, Juliana filed for divorce. Herbert randomly closed one of the stores around that time and swept up their son on this unexpected holiday to the lake. Whilst Herb was away, Juliana allowed the police to search her house and the grounds. So the officers, along with Juliana and a lawyer, were all in the forest, and it all looked pretty normal until they started disturbing the ground beneath them. One of them looks down and shouts, "I think I found a bone," and Juliana was in complete shock. She obviously had found that skull that her son found, and that was playing on her mind as well, because the way that he was acting and things, and obviously they'd already found this skull in the back garden, which he explained away, don't get me wrong. But now the police were here, they were finding these bones, and she was just devastated. Her lawyer reportedly looked to the ground where he was stood, and he found some teeth by his feet. They pretty much looked all across the floor, and they realised that these little pebbles and rocks that were strewn everywhere were not rocks or pebbles. They were actually bone fragments. And that was when they began to find more and more human remains. After this was actually sent off and it was confirmed that these bones were human, they began to search the property extensively. They began digging and they found these sets of charred bones, they found finger bones. They just began uncovering all of these remains, and there were so many of them. The excavations continued, and the number of diggers had actually gone up to 60 volunteers. Mostly those were consisted of off-duty policemen and firemen. The first couple of days produced an amazing 5,500 small bones, teeth. They found 7 first metacarpal bones, which is basically kind of this area on your thumb, and they were all the left side, so that meant that there was at least 7 bodies there. At least. After they had combed the entirety of the area, they thought that they were almost done, but they weren't. Neighbours from the adjacent farm over came to the police, and they told them that they had also found evidence of bones there too. They led investigators to an area that cut through with a drainage ditch that separated the two properties. In this ditch, they found human ribs, vertebrae, and spines. There were so many bones found, and they were really intact still, to the point where they were still stuck up from the mud. Shovels dug up more and more bones, and with them they dug up these cans of beer. It was Miller Genuine Draft Beer, which was Herbert's favourite drink, and they found some handcuffs that were probably used to bind the victims. By the time the exhumation ended, 140 bones were estimated as belonging to another 7 victims, making the count to at least 11 people murdered on this land alone. They were actually able to identify 4 of these men using dental records, and the 4 that they identified initially were 4 of the people that were on the missing persons list that had gone missing over the years. They identified Roger Goodlett, Stephen Hale, Manuel Resendez, and Richard Hamilton. Obviously, they informed the families, and this just caused even more devastation. At this point, they were only missing. Missing, obviously, is very important and very scary, but there's still the hope that they're still alive somewhere, and finding the bodies confirms that they're not. And obviously, that's just awful news to get for anyone. At this point, they went to the condominium on the lake, and they took custody of Herb's son. He was a high suspect in this case now. All these bodies were in his back garden, and they wanted the son, obviously, in safety, so they took him, but they didn't take Herb into custody. I believe that was because the local police who was dealing with the case now had to hand it over to Hamilton police because of where the bodies were found. So that was very unfortunate because they couldn't interview Herb or take him into custody because it was Hamilton police now, and Hamilton police held off on it. I guess they wanted to gather more information before they arrested him, which was a really big mistake. Obviously unbeknown to them at the time, but it was. Because Herb just completely vanished. And of course, he would do. Nobody who kills someone, not many people anyway, actually want to get caught. They want to get away with it. He had this opportunity now to vanish, and he took it. He vanished. It really confuses me why they didn't take him into custody that day. I understand that the police want to get the full picture, but they had a lot of evidence to say that potentially he was their main suspect, and so they could have taken him in, but they just chose not to, and then he disappeared, so go figure. They eventually did put out a warrant for his arrest, but they couldn't find him anywhere. He'd simply just gone. Then on the 3rd of July in 1996, 3 campers in Ontario Pinery Park in Canada made a gruesome discovery. Lying next to a revolver, they found the body of a man who had shot himself in the head, and beside him was a 3-page suicide note. This man was Herbert Baumeister, and he had committed suicide on Lake Huron. His suicide note went on to detail the failings of his marriage and the failings of his business. It obviously mentioned his children and things like that, but not once did it mention any bones in his back garden. Not once did he admit to any murders or anything committed or anything done wrong, really. He just left that entire section out. He detailed the reason for killing himself was because of all his failings, and his last words in this letter was, "I'm going to eat a peanut butter sandwich," which was his favourite snack, "and then go to sleep." And that was that. He was gone. Herb was very much thought of as this wonderful family man. He was well respected. He was this devoted family man, this devoted father and husband, who was seemingly a normal guy. I did find this home video that was taken in Christmas of 1994, which was 2 years before he actually killed himself.
This Christmas, all that I want is world peace. But if I can't have world peace, I'd like some of those red and green M&M peanuts and a big hug. That's all.
This man in this video, seemingly normal, was wishing for world peace, while his back garden contained at least 8 skeletons at the time. It's just so insane how people can lead double lives. Those closest around him, his wife and his family, just didn't have a clue. Not in the slightest. Even the public thought he was this normal guy. Whilst I was researching this case, I also found a video interview that Herb did with Wish TV.
Herb Baumeister of Carmel saw it all.
I said to my son, they're gonna hit that raccoon with a spray gun, and sure enough, they just striped right over its face and neck. Didn't even move it, no effort to, get it out of the way.
Now, this man was going on about how this raccoon deserved better.
The painter should have had a chalk line drawn around his career by state officials. There was no excuse for that. The poor thing deserved a better fate than that.
And he has strangled, kidnapped, murdered all of these people, put the bodies in his back garden, and this raccoon deserved better. Go figures. I guess he was able to disguise his other life because he would work a lot and he would disappear a lot, and that was just normal for the family. They just assumed he was working, or as I said, when the tensions got high, she stayed away a lot. Juliana went to the lake house and he would stay at home, which gave him the opportunity to commit all these crimes. And he would go trawling through these gay bars, searching for his victims. Juliana was cleared of the murders because she was out of time, sort of when the time was that these men went missing. It was found that Herb began dumping the bodies closer and closer to his home, to the point where they were pretty much up to his back door. This man literally had children running around his back garden, running around that forest, and he dumped the bodies pretty much right outside his house. He was arrogantly confident that he wouldn't be caught. Just the disposal of the bodies was just so confident. It's just insane to think about, really, because his children were playing around bones of men that his father had killed. In total, the police did uncover the remains of 11 men, only of which 8 were actually identified. Herb was also suspected of killing 9 of the men, whose bodies were found in rural areas along Interstate 70 between Indianapolis and Ohio during the mid-1980s. These were actually called the I70 murders. One eyewitness did actually identify Herb as being the person that they saw leaving the bar in 1983, with Michael Riley, who was later found strangled to death, half naked in the lake, in a similar manner to the other I70 murders. Herb moved to the farm, which was 1 year after the I70 murders had stopped, and was the same year that the men began going missing. John later stated that Herb had actually insinuated to him that he'd killed at least 50, possibly even 60 people. But because he took his own life, he would never get charged for it, because that is the law, and he would simply just remain a suspect, the prime suspect in this case, even though we know he did it. This man killed so many people, and it isn't even known how many people he actually killed. And he never served his justice because the police kind of dropped the ball. They didn't arrest him when they really should have done, and he took his own life as a result of it. He was allowed to escape and take his life and then never serve justice for what he did. The families never really got justice, and they never really will. Most of them weren't even identified, so there's still some families out there that don't even know if their loved one was one of Herb's victims. The most terrifying thing, personally, I found about this case was how none of his family knew. Juliana felt like she knew Herb like the back of her hand. She was with him for 25 years. He was this loving man. He was this entrepreneur who would often support charities, and yet he had this gruesome side to him that even she didn't know about.
I know a great deal about Herb Baumeister. I know more about him than all the people on the face of this earth put together. But I know nothing about this other side. Nothing.
Just goes to show that you can never truly know some people, no matter how much you think you do. And that's a really scary thought. So yeah, that's the end of this case. If you guys have any more suggestions you'd like me to look into, let me know. I'll look into them for you. If you've enjoyed this video, give me a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you like this content and would like to see similar videos. Anyway guys, that's all I have today on the American serial killer Herbert Baumeister. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye!